The diner sat on the edge of a quiet highway, its neon sign flickering faintly in the cold night air. It wasn't much to look at, just a small building with cracked windows and peeling paint. But it had been standing there for decades, serving truckers, travelers, and locals alike. Inside, the atmosphere was warm despite the chill outside, thanks to the hum of fluorescent lights and the comforting smell of coffee brewing in the corner. Emily stood behind the counter, tapping her pen against the notepad in her hand. She sighed loudly, glancing at the clock above the door. It was almost midnight and she was exhausted. Her feet ached from hours of running back and forth between tables, and her patience was wearing thin. Most of the customers tonight were rude or unappreciative, leaving her tips far below what she needed to make ends meet. Another day, another dollar, she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. Emily wasn't one to complain often, at least not out loud, but tonight was testing her limits. Between the endless orders, spilled drinks, and sarcastic comments from patrons who thought they were smarter than her, she felt like she'd reached her breaking point. Just as she started wiping down the counter for the 100th time, the bell above the door jingled softly. A man walked in, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the parking lot. He was tall, dressed in a black leather jacket and dark jeans, with sunglasses perched on his nose even though it was nighttime. His presence seemed calm, almost unnervingly, so as if he didn't belong in this dingy little diner. Emily groaned inwardly. Great, she thought. Another entitled customer. She plastered on a fake smile and approached him reluctantly. "What can I get you?" she asked, trying to keep her tone polite but failing miserably. The man slid into a booth near the window without saying a word. He removed his sunglasses slowly, revealing sharp, intense eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the room. For a moment, Emily felt uneasy, as though he could see right through her act. But then he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Coffee? Black." Emily scribbled the order onto her notepad, rolling her eyes when she turned away. "Figures," she mumbled. "Some Hollywood wannabe showing up here, acting all mysterious." She glanced over her shoulder as she headed toward the coffee machine, noticing how he leaned back in the booth, his gaze fixed on the rain-speckled window. As she poured the coffee, Emily couldn't help but let her mind wander. Who was this guy? Why did he seem so out of place? And why did he wear sunglasses indoors? She shook her head, annoyed at herself for caring. Probably just some rich guy slumming it for kicks, she thought bitterly. When she returned to the table with his steaming mug, she set it down harder than necessary, earning a raised eyebrow from the man. "Here you go," she said flatly, crossing her arms. "Anything else?" He took a sip of the coffee, nodding slightly. "No, thank you," he replied, his tone measured and polite. Then, after a pause, he added, "Sometimes what we see isn't always what it seems." Emily blinked, caught off guard by the comment. Was he talking about the coffee? About her? Or was he just being weird for the sake of it? She frowned, leaning forward slightly. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. The man smiled faintly, setting the mug down on the table. "It means appearances can be deceiving. People and things are rarely as simple as they appear." Emily straightened up, irritation bubbling beneath the surface. "Well, excuse me if I don't have time for riddles," she snapped, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Some of us are just trying to earn a paycheck around here." To her surprise, the man didn't react defensively. Instead, he chuckled softly as if amused by her outburst. "Fair enough," he said, leaning back again. "But maybe next time try looking beyond the surface. You might be surprised by what you find." Emily huffed, turning on her heel and walking away. What was wrong with this guy? First, he shows up out of nowhere acting all cryptic, and now he's giving her life advice? She shook her head, muttering to herself as she went back to cleaning the counter. "Weirdo," she muttered under her breath. For the next few minutes, Emily tried to focus on her work, refilling salt shakers and organizing menus. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the man in the booth. Every time she glanced over at him, he seemed perfectly relaxed, sipping his coffee as if nothing unusual was happening. Yet there was an aura about him, a quiet confidence that made her uneasy. Finally, unable to resist any longer, Emily decided to confront him. She marched over to his table, planting her hands on her hips. "Okay, listen," she began, her voice firm. "Who exactly are you? And why do you keep saying such strange things?" The man looked up at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment he said nothing, simply studying her face as if searching for something. Then very slowly he spoke. "Let's just say I'm someone who knows more than I let on. And maybe, just maybe, I'm here for a reason." Emily stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or roll her eyes. This whole situation was ridiculous. "Yeah, okay," she said dryly. "Sure you are. Look, buddy, I don't have time for your nonsense. If you're done with your coffee, I'll bring you the check." As she turned to leave, the man called after her. "You don't know me," he said quietly, his words carrying a weight that made her pause, "and maybe you should before judging." Emily froze, her back still facing him. For a brief second she considered turning around, asking him what he meant, but instead she forced herself to keep moving, dismissing his words as nothing more than empty rhetoric. After all, what did she care about some random stranger with a penchant for dramatics? Little did she know, those words would soon prove truer than she could ever imagine. Emily couldn't shake the strange feeling that had settled in her chest after the man's cryptic comment. She busied herself wiping down tables and rearranging condiment bottles, trying to distract herself from the nagging curiosity gnawing at her mind. Still, every time she glanced over at him, he seemed completely unfazed, calmly sipping his coffee, staring out the rain-speckled window as though nothing unusual was happening. Her frustration grew with each passing minute. Who did this guy think he was? Some kind of enigmatic philosopher dropping vague hints about life while sitting in a rundown diner? It was absurd, and yet there was something about him, something unsettling, that she couldn't quite put her finger on. Finally, unable to contain herself any longer, Emily marched back to his table. "All right, listen," she said sharply, slamming her notepad onto the edge of the booth. "You've been sitting here acting all mysterious for the past 10 minutes. If you're just going to waste my time with your weird comments, maybe it's best if you leave." The man looked up at her, his expression calm but piercing. He didn't seem offended or surprised by her outburst. Instead, he regarded her with an almost amused smile. "I'm not wasting your time," he replied evenly. "But I understand why you might feel that way." "Oh, do you?" Emily shot back, crossing her arms. "Because from where I'm standing, you're just another entitled celebrity type who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. You probably ride motorcycles and quote poetry, right?" His eyebrows lifted slightly at her jab, but he didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Let me ask you something," he said, his tone thoughtful. "Why are you so quick to judge me based on appearances?" Emily blinked, caught off guard by the question. She opened her mouth to respond, then hesitated. Why was she so quick to dismiss him? Wasn't that exactly what she hated when people did it to her? Judged her based on her job, her clothes, or the fact that she worked long hours for little pay? "I don't need a lecture from you," she snapped defensively, avoiding eye contact. "You don't know anything about me." "Maybe not," the man admitted, his voice softening. "But I know enough to see that you're skeptical of authority figures, and maybe even skeptical of yourself." Emily's cheeks flushed with anger. How dare he psychoanalyze her like she was some character in one of those pretentious movies she always rolled her eyes at. "You know what?" she said, leaning closer. "You're just like every other rich guy who walks in here thinking he's better than everyone else, acting all deep and mysterious like you've got some big secret no one else understands." The man tilted his head, studying her intently. "And what makes you think I don't have a secret?" Emily scoffed, throwing up her hands. "Oh, please, spare me the Hollywood drama. You're probably just some actor looking for attention, aren't you?" What's your name anyway? Do I even know who you are? For the first time since he'd walked into the diner, the man hesitated. His lips curved into a faint smile, but there was something guarded in his expression now. You might, he said cryptically, but knowing my name won't tell you everything. Well, that's helpful, Emily muttered, rolling her eyes. Look, if you're done with your existential crisis, can we focus on reality for a second? Like how much longer you're planning to sit here drinking coffee while I clean up after you? The man chuckled softly, shaking his head. Fair point, but tell me, what would you say if I told you the truth about myself? Would you believe me? Emily froze, unsure whether to laugh or call him out for being ridiculous. Truth about himself? What was he talking about? She narrowed her eyes suspiciously. What truth? She demanded. Are you secretly a billionaire? A spy? Some kind of alien? To her surprise, the man didn't laugh or brush off her comment. Instead, he leaned back in the booth, his gaze steady and serious. If I told you the truth, he repeated slowly, would you believe me? Emily stared at him, her irritation giving way to confusion. There was something in his tone, a gravity she hadn't heard before, that made her pause. For a moment, she wondered if he was actually serious. Could he really be hiding something extraordinary beneath his quiet demeanor? Before she could respond, the bell above the door jingled again. A group of rowdy teenagers stumbled into the diner, their laughter echoing through the small space. Emily groaned inwardly, realizing she'd have to deal with them soon. Reluctantly, she turned away from the man's booth, muttering under her breath, "Whatever. Keep your secrets, I don't care." As she walked toward the newcomers, she couldn't help but glance back at him one last time. He was watching her closely, his expression unreadable. It was almost as if he were waiting for something or someone. Meanwhile, outside the diner, the storm clouds above began to swirl more violently. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the parking lot in bursts of blinding white light. The wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending shivers down Emily's spine. Something felt wrong about the weather. It wasn't normal. Not even for a typical autumn storm. Back inside, the teenagers were growing louder, arguing over menu items and snapping photos of themselves on their phones. Emily gritted her teeth, forcing herself to stay professional as she took their orders. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the man in the booth watching the commotion with a mixture of amusement and concern. "You okay?" she asked sarcastically as she passed his table again. "Or is the chaos too much for your delicate sensibilities?" He smiled faintly, shaking his head. "Not at all," he replied, "though I suspect things are about to get a lot more chaotic." Emily frowned, turning to follow his gaze toward the window. Outside, the storm showed no signs of letting up. In fact, it seemed to be intensifying, the rain falling harder and faster than before. She shook her head dismissively. "Yeah, well, storms happen," she muttered. "No big deal." But deep down she wasn't so sure. There was an uneasiness creeping into the air, a tension that made her skin prickle. She tried to shrug it off, focusing instead on delivering menus and refilling drinks. But the man's words lingered in her mind, refusing to fade away. By the time she returned to his table to drop off the check, the atmosphere in the diner had shifted entirely. The teenagers were quieter now, glancing nervously at the windows as thunder rumbled ominously overhead. Even the regular customers seemed on edge, their conversations trailing off into uneasy silence. The man accepted the check without comment, sliding a few bills onto the table. "Thank you," he said simply, rising to his feet. As he pulled on his leather jacket, he turned to face Emily once more. "Remember what I said earlier," he added quietly. "Sometimes what we see isn't always what it seems." Emily crossed her arms, glaring at him. Yeah, whatever, thanks for the fortune cookie wisdom." But as he walked toward the door, she found herself following him instinctively. Something about the way he moved, with purpose, as if he knew exactly where he was going, made her hesitate. Before she could stop herself, she blurted out, "Wait, where are you going?" He paused, glancing back at her with a faint smile. "Somewhere important," he replied. "Stay safe, Emily." Her heart skipped a beat. How did he know her name? She hadn't introduced herself, and she certainly hadn't told him anything personal. Panic bubbled in her chest as she watched him push open the door and step outside. The storm hit her full force as the door swung shut behind him. Rain lashed against the pavement, and the wind howled like a living thing. Through the haze of raindrops, she saw him walking calmly toward the edge of the parking lot, his figure illuminated briefly by another flash of lightning. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm stopped, the rain ceased, the wind died down, and an eerie stillness settled over the world. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her pulse racing. What had just happened? And why did she feel like the stranger in the leather jacket had left her with more questions than answers? Little did she know, her night was far from over, and the truth about the man she'd dismissed as just another odd customer was about to change everything she thought she knew. The silence that followed the sudden end of the storm was deafening. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her hand still gripping the edge of the frame as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Her breath came in shallow gasps, and her heart pounded loudly in her ears. Something wasn't right, something far beyond the usual unpredictability of weather. Her eyes darted across the parking lot, searching for any sign of the mysterious man who had just walked out into the chaos. But he was nowhere to be seen. The rain-soaked pavement glistened under the dim glow of the diner's neon sign, yet there was no trace of him. It was as though he had vanished into thin air. "Emily?" a voice called from behind her, breaking her trance. One of the teenagers from earlier stood near the counter, looking pale and shaken. What just happened? She turned slowly, forcing herself to compose her expression. "I don't know," she replied, her voice quieter than she intended. "Probably just some freak storm." But even as she said the words, she didn't believe them. The unnatural calm outside felt wrong, too perfect, too deliberate. It was as if the world itself had paused, holding its breath. Before anyone could say anything else, a low rumble echoed through the air. Not thunder this time, but something deeper, more mechanical. The ground beneath their feet trembled faintly, sending plates clattering against tables and causing everyone in the diner to exchange nervous glances. "What's that sound?" another customer asked, his voice rising with panic. Emily stepped fully outside, ignoring the cold water soaking through her sneakers. She squinted toward the horizon, where the clouds seemed to part unnaturally, revealing a patch of starless sky. Then, without warning, a massive shape descended from above, a sleek metallic object that gleamed ominously in the darkness. It was a spaceship. The sight sent a jolt of terror coursing through her body. Her legs locked in place as she stared up at the enormous vessel hovering silently above the parking lot. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting the faint light of the diner's sign. Strange symbols etched into its hull pulsed with an eerie blue glow, casting long shadows across the ground. People inside the diner began screaming, scrambling to get away from the windows. Chairs toppled over, and dishes shattered as chaos erupted. Emily wanted to run too, but her feet refused to move. Instead, she watched in horrified fascination as the ship emitted a series of high-pitched whines, scanning the area with beams of light that swept over cars and buildings like probing fingers. And then, she saw him. The man in the leather jacket emerged from the shadows near the edge of the parking lot, standing directly beneath the alien craft. His posture was calm, almost defiant, as if he had been expecting this moment all along. He raised one arm, pointing a small device at the ship. With a flick of his wrist, the gadget unfolded into a weapon unlike anything Emily had ever seen. A sleek, futuristic rifle pulsing with energy. Her jaw dropped. "What the hell is going on?" she whispered, half to herself. The man fired a shot at the ship, and the beam struck the hull with a loud crackle. For a brief moment, the alien vessel shuddered, its lights flickering erratically. Then, a hatch opened on its underside, releasing several towering drones that landed heavily on the asphalt. They were humanoid in shape but grotesquely large, their bodies covered in jagged armor plating. Their glowing red eyes scanned the area, locking onto the man below. Emily stumbled backward, her mind racing. Was this real? Was she dreaming? None of it made sense. Aliens, spaceships, and why was this stranger, the same guy she'd mocked and dismissed earlier, standing alone against them? As the drones advanced, the man moved with surprising speed, dodging their attacks while firing precise shots from his weapon. Each blast connected with devastating accuracy, disabling one drone after another. Despite his skill, however, the sheer number of enemies quickly overwhelmed him. 2 more drones dropped from the ship, surrounding him in a tight circle. Damn it, Emily muttered, clutching the door frame. She should have run back inside with the others, hidden in the safety of the diner. But instead, she found herself rooted to the spot, unable to tear her gaze away from the battle unfolding before her. Just as the drones closed in, preparing to strike, the man shouted something unintelligible. A bright flash erupted from his weapon, creating a blinding burst of light that sent the remaining drones stumbling backward. Seizing the opportunity, he sprinted toward the diner, his movements fluid and calculated. When he reached the entrance, he grabbed Emily by the arm, pulling her aside. "Get inside," he ordered, his voice urgent but controlled. "Now." Emily blinked, momentarily stunned by the intensity in his eyes. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice shaking. He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as the drones regrouped. "I'll explain later," he said tersely. "Right now we need to survive." With that, he pushed her gently but firmly back into the diner. The other customers huddled together near the back wall, whispering frantically among themselves. Some clutched makeshift weapons, knives, chairs, anything they could use to defend themselves. Others simply cowered, tears streaming down their faces. Emily's instincts kicked in. Whatever was happening, she couldn't let fear paralyze her. Grabbing a baseball bat from behind the counter, she turned to face the man. "If you're fighting those things, I'm helping," she declared, gripping the bat tightly. He looked at her, surprise flickering across his features. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Stay here. You'll be safer." "I'm not letting you go out there alone," Emily shot back, her tone firm despite the tremor in her hands. "Besides, you've already saved my life once tonight. Fair's fair." For a moment he studied her as if weighing her determination against the danger ahead. Then, with a resigned nod, he handed her a small device from his pocket. "Here, press this button if you're in trouble. It'll create a temporary shield." Emily accepted the gadget, slipping it into her apron pocket. "Got it," she said, swallowing hard. "Now tell me what the hell is going on." The man sighed, running a hand through his damp hair. "Those beings," he began, gesturing toward the window, "aren't from Earth. They're scouts sent by a hostile species intent on wiping out humanity. I've been monitoring their activity for years, waiting for the right moment to intervene." Emily stared at him, her brain struggling to process his words. "Wait, you're saying aliens are attacking us? And you're, what, some kind of soldier?" "Not exactly," he admitted. "I'm part of an intergalactic council tasked with protecting civilizations like yours. My mission was to blend in, observe, and prepare for moments like this." "So you're an alien?" she asked, incredulous. He shook his head. "No, I'm human, or at least I was. I volunteered for this role decades ago. Time works differently. Where I come from." Emily's head spun. Everything she thought she knew about the universe and about him was crumbling before her eyes. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she demanded, anger mixing with her fear. "There wasn't time," he replied simply. "And honestly, would you have believed me?" She opened her mouth to argue, but the truth hit her like a punch to the gut. No, she wouldn't have believed him. Not until now, when the evidence was staring her in the face. Outside, the drones began advancing again, their metallic footsteps echoing ominously. The man glanced at Emily, his expression grim. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," she muttered, tightening her grip on the bat. Together, they stepped back, into the stormy night, facing the unknown with nothing but courage and each other to guide them. As the first drone charged forward, Emily swung the bat with all her strength, connecting with its armored leg. To her astonishment, the blow staggered the creature, giving the man enough time to fire a crippling shot at its chest. "Nice work," he called, grinning despite the chaos. Emily grinned back, adrenaline surging through her veins. For the first time in her life, she felt truly alive, and oddly hopeful. If they could stand together, maybe they had a chance after all. As the battle raged on, Emily realized something important. Sometimes, the people you least expect turn out to be your greatest allies. And sometimes, the truth is stranger and more beautiful than fiction. The battle outside the diner was a blur of light, sound, and motion. Emily swung her baseball bat with everything she had, each strike fueled by a mix of fear, anger, and determination. The man, whose name she still didn't know, but who now seemed less like an enigma and more like an unlikely partner, moved with precision, firing calculated shots from his energy weapon. Together, they formed a chaotic yet effective team, fending off the towering alien drones one by one. Despite their efforts, the odds were stacked against them. For every drone they disabled, another seemed to descend from the massive spaceship looming overhead. Its glowing symbols pulsed brighter with each passing moment, as if mocking their resistance. Emily's arms burned from swinging the bat repeatedly, and sweat mixed with rainwater dripped down her face. But she refused to give up, not when so much depended on holding their ground. "Keep moving," the man shouted over the din of explosions and metallic groans. "Don't let them surround us." Emily nodded, dodging to the side as a drone lunged at her with razor-sharp claws. She stumbled briefly but quickly regained her footing, slamming the bat into the creature's midsection. It staggered backward, giving her just enough time to dive out of the way before it could retaliate. The man fired another shot, taking down the drone with a burst of blue energy. He glanced at Emily, his expression tense but focused. "We're running out of time," he said, reloading his weapon with practiced ease. "They'll send reinforcements soon." Emily gritted her teeth, wiping rainwater from her eyes. "What do we do then?" she demanded, her voice trembling slightly despite her bravado. "Just keep fighting until we drop?" He hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the spaceship. "There's one option left," he admitted reluctantly, "but it's risky." "What is it?" Emily asked, clutching the bat tighter. "I can overload my weapon," he explained, gesturing to the device in his hand. "It'll create enough EMP blast to disable the ship, but it'll also knock out everything within a half-mile radius, including us if we're too close." Emily's stomach churned at the thought. An EMP blast sounded dangerous, possibly deadly. But what other choice did they have? If they didn't act quickly, the aliens would overrun the diner, and everyone inside. She glanced back at the building, where terrified customers huddled together, praying for salvation. "We don't have a choice," she said finally, meeting his eyes. "Do it." The man nodded grimly, adjusting the settings on his weapon. "I'll need you to cover me while I set it up. Once it's ready, we'll have about 10 seconds to get clear." 10 seconds? Emily echoed, her heart sinking. That wasn't much time at all. Still, she forced herself to nod. "All right, let's do this." With renewed purpose, Emily charged forward, using the bat to fend off any drones that came near. Her movements were fueled by desperation now, each swing more reckless than the last. Pain radiated through her arms and her lungs burned from exertion, but she pushed through it, knowing that failure wasn't an option. Meanwhile, the man worked furiously to prepare the EMP device. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, even as debris rained down around him from the ongoing battle. Occasionally, he fired off quick shots to keep the drones at bay, trusting Emily to handle anything that got too close. "You almost done?" Emily called, narrowly avoiding a swipe from one of the drones. "Almost," he replied, his voice strained. "Hold them off for 30 more seconds." Emily gritted her teeth, planting her feet firmly on the ground. She swung the bat with all her might, cracking it against the nearest drone's head. Sparks flew as the creature stumbled backward, giving her a brief reprieve. Another drone approached, its red eyes glowing menacingly, summoning every ounce Of strength she had left, Emily delivered a powerful blow to its chest, sending it crashing to the ground. Finally, the man stood up, holding the modified weapon aloft. "It's ready," he shouted. "Let's go." Without hesitation, Emily turned and sprinted after him, dodging falling rubble and laser blasts as they made their way towards safer ground. Behind them, the remaining drones began closing in, their mechanical limbs clanking ominously against the pavement. "Faster," the man urged, glancing over his shoulder. "We've only got 10 seconds. Emily pushed herself harder, her legs screaming in protest. They reached the edge of the parking lot just as the first warning lights on the weapon began flashing. With a final burst of speed, they dove behind an overturned car, taking cover as the countdown reached 0. A deafening explosion rocked the area, sending a shockwave rippling outward in all directions. The bright flash of the EMP blast illuminated the night sky, momentarily blinding anyone who dared to look directly at it. The spaceship above shuddered violently, its systems failing as the pulse disrupted its core functions. One by one, the drones collapsed, their bodies sparking and sputtering before going completely still. For a long moment, there was silence, broken only by the distant hum of residual electricity fading into the air. Emily lay sprawled on the wet pavement, her chest heaving as she struggled to catch her breath. Her ears rang from the force of the blast, and her entire body ached from the fight. Slowly, she pushed herself upright, looking around at the devastation. The man sat nearby, leaning against the car with his head bowed. His jacket was singed in places, and his face was streaked with dirt and sweat. Despite his exhaustion, he managed a faint smile when he saw Emily staring at him. "We did it," he said softly, his voice hoarse but triumphant. Emily shook her head, laughing weakly. "Did we really? Or are they just regrouping somewhere else?" "They won't be back tonight," he assured her, standing slowly. "That blast should have disabled their primary systems for hours, if not days. By the time they recover, reinforcements will arrive to deal with them." "Reinforcements?" Emily repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You mean more people like you?" He nodded. "More agents stationed across Earth. We work together to protect humanity from threats like these." Emily exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. Everything still felt surreal, like a scene straight out of a science fiction movie. Yet here she was, standing in the aftermath of an alien invasion, covered in mud and bruises, talking casually about intergalactic defense forces. "So what happens now?" she asked, gesturing to the ruined parking lot and the smoking wreckage of the drones. "Do we just clean this up and pretend nothing happened?" The man chuckled, shaking his head. "Not exactly. Cleanup teams will arrive shortly to erase any evidence of tonight's events. As far as the public knows, this was just a freak storm." Emily frowned, crossing her arms. "And what about me? Am I supposed to forget everything too? Pretend I never met you, or saw aliens trying to attack us?" He met her gaze, his expression softening. "You have a choice," he said simply. "You can walk away and live your life as if none of this ever happened. Or—" He paused, weighing his words carefully. "Or you can join us, help protect Earth from future threats." Emily stared at him, stunned. "Join them? Become part of some secret organization tasked with defending humanity from extraterrestrial dangers?" It sounded insane, and yet strangely appealing. After everything she'd seen tonight, how could she possibly go back to serving coffee and pretending the world was ordinary? "I don't even know your name," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled, extending his hand. "Call me Keanu," he replied. "And welcome to the team." As dawn broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the battered landscape, Emily found herself smiling for the first time in what felt like forever. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: her life would never be the same again. To be concluded, in Part 5. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the remnants of the storm clouds, casting a soft glow over the parking lot. What had once been a quiet, unassuming diner now resembled a war zone. Scattered debris, charred patches of asphalt, and the twisted remains of alien drones littered the ground. Despite the destruction, there was an odd sense of calm in the air, as if the world itself was taking a deep breath after surviving chaos. Emily stood near the edge of the parking lot, her arms crossed tightly against the morning chill. She watched as black vans rolled into view, their tires crunching over broken glass and rubble. Men and women dressed in plain uniforms stepped out, moving with practiced efficiency. They began dismantling the wreckage, loading pieces of alien technology into crates and spraying chemicals to erase any trace of the battle. Within minutes, it was clear that nothing would remain to prove the events of the night before ever happened. Keanu stood nearby, observing the cleanup crew with a thoughtful expression. His leather jacket was slung over one shoulder, revealing a simple black t-shirt underneath. Though his face bore signs of exhaustion, there was a quiet confidence in his demeanor, a man who had seen this kind of aftermath countless times before. Emily turned to him, her mind racing with questions. This is normal for you?" she asked, gesturing to the scene around them. "Alien invasions, secret cleanups. It's just another day at the office?" Keanu chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Not exactly normal," he admitted. "But yes, it's part of the job. Humanity isn't ready to know about the dangers lurking beyond our planet. Our role is to protect Earth while keeping its people safe and unaware." Emily frowned, processing his words. She glanced back at the diner, where the terrified customers were slowly emerging, blinking in confusion at the suddenly peaceful morning. To them, the storm had passed, leaving behind only minor damage. None of them suspected the truth or the fact that they owed their lives to two unlikely heroes. "So what happens next?" Emily asked, turning her attention back to Keanu. "You said I have a choice. But what does joining you actually mean? Am I signing up for some intergalactic army or something?" Keanu smiled faintly, leaning against the hood of a nearby car. "It's not quite that dramatic," he replied. "We're more like guardians. We monitor potential threats, gather intelligence, and intervene when necessary. Most of the time, it's about prevention, not fighting battles like last night." "And if I say no?" Emily pressed, though deep down she already knew her answer. "Do I just go back to my life and pretend none of this ever happened?" "You could," Keanu said simply. "No one would force you to join us. But I think you've already realized that going back to normal won't be easy. Not after everything you've seen." Emily sighed, running a hand through her damp hair. He was right. How could she return to serving coffee and arguing with rude customers after facing off against alien invaders? Her perspective on life had shifted irrevocably. Still, the idea of stepping into such an unfamiliar world filled her with both excitement and trepidation. "What about training?" she asked hesitantly. "I'm not exactly combat ready, you know. Last night was, well, let's just say I got lucky." Keanu nodded, understanding her concerns. "Don't worry," he assured her. "We'll teach you everything you need to know. Self-defense, tactical strategies, even advanced tech usage. You won't be thrown into the deep end without preparation." Emily bit her lip, considering his offer. Joining this mysterious organization meant leaving behind the only life she'd ever known. It meant stepping into the unknown and embracing a new identity, one tied to protecting humanity from forces most people couldn't even imagine. But despite the risks, the thought of making a real difference appealed to her in a way nothing else ever had. Finally, she looked up at Keanu, determination shining in her eyes. "All right," she said firmly. "I'm in." A flicker of pride crossed Keanu's face. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "This isn't a decision to take lightly." "I'm sure," Emily replied, her voice steady. "After all this, how can I walk away? Besides," she smirked slightly, regaining some of her usual sass. "Someone's got to keep you grounded, right?" Keanu laughed, extending his hand. "Welcome aboard, Emily." As they shook hands, a van pulled up beside them, its engine idling quietly. A woman stepped out, dressed in a crisp suit and carrying a clipboard. She introduced herself as Agent Carter, explaining that she would accompany Emily to a secure facility for orientation and training. Emily nodded, trying to absorb the whirlwind of information being thrown at her. Before climbing into the van, she turned back to Keanu, feeling a pang of gratitude mixed with uncertainty. "Hey," she said softly. "Thanks for everything. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't even be here." Keanu smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Thank you, Emily. Without your courage tonight, we might not have succeeded. You proved that sometimes the most unexpected people hold the key to victory." Emily grinned, feeling a surge of pride. For the first time in years, she felt truly valued, not just as a waitress or a cog in society's machine, but as someone capable of making a difference. With that, she climbed into the van, watching as Keanu gave her a final wave before stepping back into the shadows. As the vehicle pulled away, Emily leaned against the seat, staring out the window at the rising sun. Her heart raced with anticipation, fear, and hope. Whatever lay ahead, she knew she was ready to face it head-on. Weeks later, Emily found herself in a high-tech training facility hidden deep within the mountains, surrounded by others like her, ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. She learned skills she never imagined mastering. From hand-to-hand combat to operating advanced alien weaponry, every lesson brought her closer to becoming the guardian Keanu believed she could be. Though she rarely saw him during those early days, his words stayed with her. Whenever doubt crept in, she remembered his advice. Sometimes what we see isn't always what it seems. It reminded her to look beyond appearances, to trust in the strength she carried inside. Months passed, and Emily grew into her new role with remarkable speed. Her sharp wit and quick thinking made her invaluable during missions, earning her respect among her peers. Slowly but surely, she began to find her place in this strange, dangerous world. One evening, as she sat atop a hill overlooking the facility, Keanu joined her, sitting silently beside her. They watched the sunset together, neither speaking for several minutes. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. "Your old life, I mean." Keanu tilted his head, considering her question. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember why I chose this path. Humanity has so much potential, if given the chance to thrive. Protecting that future is worth any sacrifice." Emily nodded, gazing at the horizon. She understood now why he had dedicated his life to this cause. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, she felt a renewed sense of purpose knowing she was part of something greater than herself. As darkness fell, enveloping the landscape in shadow, Emily turned to Keanu with a small smile. "Guess I'll see you around, huh?" He returned her smile, standing and offering her a hand. "Count on it." Together they walked back toward the facility, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them. For Emily, the journey was only beginning. But she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer the same person who had served coffee in a rundown diner. She was a protector, a fighter, and above all, a believer in the power of humanity to rise above its limits. And somewhere, amidst the stars, other threats loomed. But for now, Earth was safe, and Emily was determined to keep it that way. The end.